The death of a marriage rarely sounds like a gunshot. It doesn't usually sound like a screaming match or a plate shattering against the wall either. In my case, the death of my marriage sounded like the soft, innocent ping of an email notification hitting my phone at 6:15 on a Tuesday morning. I was in the kitchen of our colonial-style home in Westport, Connecticut, waiting for the coffee machine to finish its gurgling cycle. The morning light was just beginning to scrape across the granite countertops. Countertops Elena had insisted we needed 3 years ago. I unlocked my phone, expecting a notification from a client or perhaps a reminder about the trash pickup. Instead, it was an alert from Equifax. A new inquiry has been detected on your credit report. If this was not you, please contact us immediately. I frowned, tapping the screen. My thumb hovered over the notification. We hadn't applied for anything. Our cars were paid off and the mortgage was on a steady, automated drip from my primary checking account. I assumed it was a glitch, or perhaps a delayed report from when we upgraded our HVAC system last winter. But curiosity, that nagging instinct that something wasn't quite aligned, made me open the app. The inquiry wasn't for a credit card. It was for a home equity line of credit, a HELOC, in the amount of $150,000. The lender was a mid-sized bank I had never done business with. I stood there, the smell of dark roast coffee filling the air, feeling a cold prickle of sweat form at the base of my neck. I was an architect. My mind was trained to look for structural flaws, for things that didn't bear the weight they were supposed to. This inquiry was a crack in the foundation. "Morning, darling." Elena walked into the kitchen, tightening the belt of her silk robe. She looked effortless, as she always did. Even after 10 years of marriage, she had a way of moving that commanded attention. Graceful, fluid, and confident. She kissed my cheek, lingering just a second longer than usual, her hand resting on my shoulder. "You're up early," she said, reaching for a mug. "Work brain," I lied, slipping my phone into my pocket. "Just thinking about the tedious zoning meeting today. Don't stress too much. You always win them over." She smiled, that dazzling, practiced smile that had helped her become one of the top real estate agents in the county. "I have a long day of showings, so I might be late tonight." I watched her pour the coffee. Her hand was steady. Her eyes were bright. There was absolutely no sign of guilt, no tremor of anxiety. If she knew about a $150,000 loan against our house, she was putting on an Academy Award-winning performance. I waited until she left for the day. As soon as her Audi pulled out of the driveway, I didn't go to my office. I went to my study and booted up my desktop. I called the bank listed on the inquiry. The automated system was a maze of frustration, but I finally got a human being on the line, a loan officer named Sarah. "I'm calling about an inquiry on my report," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I didn't apply for a HELOC." There was a pause on the other end, the clicking of a keyboard. "Let me pull that up, Mr. Bennett. Verification questions first, please." After I recited my social security number and mother's maiden name, Sarah's tone shifted from robotic to confused. "Mr. Bennett, the application was processed 3 days ago. It's actually in the final approval stage. We received the signed, notarized documents yesterday via courier." The room seemed to tilt slightly to the left. "Signed documents? I never signed anything." "I have the PDF scan right here," she said. "David Bennett and Elena Bennett. Signatures are notarized. If you're saying you didn't sign this, we have a serious problem." "Send it to me," I demanded. "Right now." 2 minutes later, the email arrived. Open the attachment, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. It was a standard loan agreement, and there, on the bottom of page 14, was my name. I zoomed in. The signature was written in blue ink. It had the sharp incline of the D and the specific lazy cross of the double T at the end. It looked like my signature. In fact, to anyone else, it was my signature. But I knew it wasn't. I have a habit, a tic really, from years of signing architectural blueprints. When I sign my name on legal documents, I always put a tiny, almost invisible dot inside the loop of the B. It's a way of marking my seal, ensuring that my plans aren't altered. It's subconscious at this point. The signature on the screen lacked the dot. I scrolled down to Elena's signature. It was bold, flamboyant, taking up twice the space of mine. And next to our names was the stamp of the notary public who had witnessed this fiction. State of Connecticut. Notary. Public. Marcus Vane. I stared at the name. I didn't know a Marcus Vane. I had never sat in a room with this man. I had never raised my right hand and sworn to the truth of this document. My eyes drifted up to the date of the signing. October 14th. October 14th. That was last Tuesday. I checked my calendar. Tuesday, I had been in Boston for a site inspection all day. I hadn't even been in the state of Connecticut until after 9 p.m. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Elena hadn't just forged my signature. She had orchestrated a felony. She had found a notary willing to stamp a document without me present. Or worse, she had brought someone in to impersonate me. But why? We weren't struggling. We had savings. My firm was doing well. Her commissions were high. Why did she need $150,000 in secret cash? And why risk prison? Why risk us to get it? I printed the document. The paper felt heavy in my hand, heavier than a few sheets of bond paper should feel. This was evidence. I walked through the house, the quiet suddenly feeling oppressive. I looked at the photos on the mantle, our wedding day, a trip to Napa, her smiling with her arm around me at a Christmas party. It all looked the same as it had an hour ago, but the context had shifted violently. I went into our bedroom. Elena was messy in her personal space. She often left her purse or documents on her vanity. I wasn't a snoop. I respected her privacy because I trusted her. But trust was a currency she had just devalued to zero. I opened the top drawer of her vanity. Makeup, jewelry, a spare set of keys. Nothing. I checked her bedside table. A book, reading glasses, hand cream. Then I went to her walk-in closet. In the back behind a row of winter coats was a small, fireproof lockbox. I knew about the box. We kept our passports and birth certificates there. The key was usually in her jewelry box. I retrieved the key and opened it. Inside were the passports, just as expected, but underneath them was a folder I didn't recognize. A plain manila folder with no label. I opened it. Inside wasn't the loan document. She was too smart to keep a copy of the fraud here. Instead, it was a brochure for a luxury condo development in Miami, the Meridian. And clipped to the brochure was a handwritten note on a yellow legal pad. Almost there. Just a few more days and the funds clear. Then we can finally breathe. M. Marcus Vane? The notary? I felt nausea rise in my throat. This wasn't just financial fraud. This wasn't a gambling debt or a shopping addiction. This was an exit strategy. She was stealing the equity from our home, the home I had designed, the home we had built together, to finance a new life with someone else. She was leveraging my credit, my hard work, and my trust to bankroll her betrayal. I put the folder back exactly as I found it. I locked the box. I put the key back in the jewelry box. My hands were shaking, but my mind was suddenly icy cold. If I confronted her now, she would have an excuse. She would cry. She would claim it was a mistake, or she was being blackmailed, or she did it for us. She was a master salesperson. She could sell ice to a drowning man. If I yelled, if I screamed, I would lose the advantage. She thought she was clever. She thought the ink on that page settled it. She thought I was the distracted, loving husband who trusted her blindly. She was about to find out that she wasn't the only one who knew how to read a blueprint. She had built this deception, but she had left a structural flaw. And I was going to be the one to pull the pin and watch it all come down. I sat back down at my desk and picked up the phone. I didn't call Elena. I didn't call the bank again. I called my forensic accountant. "Jim," I said when he answered, "I need you to clear your schedule. I have a puzzle and pieces are missing." The game had started, and Elena didn't even know I was playing. The hardest thing about betrayal isn't the initial shock, it's the performance that comes after. When Elena walked through the front door that evening, 7 hours after I had discovered she was mortgaging our life away, I was sitting on the living room sofa with a book I hadn't read a single page of. The air in the house felt different, charged with a static electricity that made the hair on my arm stand up. I felt like an undercover agent in my own home, a stranger infiltrating a life I had spent a decade building. "Hey, honey," she called out, her voice carrying that practiced, melodic lilt. The sound of her keys hitting the granite bowl in the foyer, clatter, slide, stop, usually signaled the end of my workday and the beginning of our evening. Now it sounded like a gavel striking a bench. I forced my muscles to relax. I adjusted my face into a mask of mild fatigue, the expression of a husband who had battled zoning boards. All day, not one who had spent the afternoon staring at a forged signature. "Hey," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "How was the showing?" She walked into the living room, kicking off her heels. She looked exhausted but wired, a frenetic energy buzzing beneath her skin. She kissed the top of my head, and I had to fight the physical urge to recoil. She smelled of her usual Chanel perfume, but beneath it, I imagined I could smell the metallic tang of deceit. "Nightmare," she sighed, collapsing onto the adjacent armchair. "The buyers from New York? They want to rip out the original wainscoting in the Colonial on Elm Street. Some people just don't have vision." "That's a shame," and I said. "You know how I feel about good wainscoting." It was a mundane exchange, a script we had rehearsed 1,000 times. But as she spoke, I wasn't listening to her words. I was watching her hands. Usually when Elena came home, her phone went onto the coffee table, face up. It was a word, sign of the open ecosystem we lived in. I knew her passcode, she knew mine. We had nothing to hide, or so I had thought. Tonight the phone stayed in her hand. When she finally set it down to pour herself a glass of wine, she placed it face down on the coaster. "Did you get that zoning approval?" she asked, taking a sip of the Pinot Noir. "Pushed to next week," I lied. Lying to her felt strange, a violation of my own code, but I reminded myself that this wasn't a marriage anymore. It was a crime scene, and I couldn't contaminate the evidence. "Everything okay with you? You seem edgy." Her eyes darted to mine, then quickly away. "Just tired, and my phone has been blowing up. This new listing is demanding." As if on cue, her phone buzzed against the coaster, a vibration that rattled through the wood and into my teeth. She snatched it up instantly. "I have to take this. It's the seller." She stood up and walked into the sunroom, sliding the glass door shut behind her. I sat there, the silence of the house pressing in on me. The seller. It was 8:30 p.m. In our world, unless the house was on fire, you didn't call your agent at 8:30 p.m. I stood up and walked softly to the edge of the hallway, peering through the glass. She wasn't speaking. She was typing furiously, her thumbs flying across the screen. Her face was illuminated by the blue glow, and for a split second I saw it. A smile. Not her professional realtor smile, and not the warm smile she gave me. It was a conspiratorial smile, a smile of relief. She was texting M. I moved back to the sofa before she finished, my heart hammering a chaotic rhythm against my ribs. Confronting her now would be a mistake. If I screamed, if I threw the HELOC papers in her face, she would panic. She would lawyer up, hide the money, and spin a narrative that I was abusive or controlling. I needed to know where that $150,000 was going. I needed to know if there was more. When she came back in, the smile was gone, replaced by a mask of professional annoyance. "Sorry about that. High-maintenance clients." "No problem," I said. "I'm actually going to turn in early. Headache." "Okay, I'll be up in a bit. I just need to send a few emails." That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythmic breathing of the woman sleeping next to me. She was fast asleep, peaceful, unburdened. How could she sleep? How could she lie there, inches from me, knowing she had committed a felony that could ruin us? The disconnect between her calm exterior and the havoc she was wreaking was sociopathic. The next morning, the surveillance began in earnest. I waited until she was in the shower. The water was running, a reliable 20-minute window. I slipped out of bed and went to her nightstand. Her phone was there, plugged into the charger. I tapped the screen. Enter passcode. I punched in 1014. Our anniversary. Incorrect passcode. My stomach dropped. She had used that code for 6 years. I tried her birthday. Incorrect passcode. I tried the last 4 digits of her social. Incorrect passcode. iPhone disabled for 1 minute. I put the phone back exactly as I found it, wiping the screen on my pajama shirt to remove any fingerprints. She had locked me out. That was an answer in itself. The digital door was bolted, which meant I had to look for physical cracks. I left for work at the usual time, but I didn't go to the office. I drove a block away, parked, and waited. At 9:15 a.m., the mail carrier arrived. Elena usually brought the mail in when she got home, or I grabbed it if I was early. We had never been possessive about it. But if the bank had finalized the loan, they would be sending confirmation letters. Hard copies. I waited for the carrier to drive off, then circled back to the house. I unlocked the mailbox at the end of the driveway. Bills, a flyer for a landscaping service, a magazine, and a thick, white envelope from Heritage Trust Bank. Important account information enclosed. I ripped it open sitting in the front seat of my car. It was the welcome kit. Welcome to your new home equity line of credit. It listed the account number, the interest rate, and the disbursement details. $150,000 wired to account ending in 8892 via FedWire on October 15th. It didn't say who owned the account ending in 8892, but it gave me a routing number. I took a picture of the document with my phone, then carefully resealed the envelope. I couldn't keep it. If the mail went missing, she would get suspicious. She needed to think everything was proceeding according to her plan. I had a heat gun in my workshop in the garage, a tool for stripping paint. I ran inside, used the heat gun to gently soften the adhesive of the envelope flap until it was tacky again, and pressed it shut. It looked untouched. I placed it back in the mailbox and drove away, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I spent the afternoon at a coffee shop in the next town over, meeting with Jim, my forensic accountant. Jim was a man of few words, a former IRS auditor who viewed financial records as autopsies. The routing number belongs to a business account, Jim said, tapping on his laptop. It's not a personal checking account. That's good and bad. Why? Good because business records leave deeper trails. Bad because it means she's laundering it. She's not just dumping it into a boyfriend's savings account. She's moving it through an entity. Can you find the entity? Give me 24 hours. But David, Jim paused, looking over his glasses. You need to be prepared. If she's moving money into a business account, this isn't a fling. This is an investment. She's building something, and she's using your house as the bricks. I drove home that evening with Jim's words echoing in my head. She's building something. I was an architect. I built things for a living. I understood structure, load-bearing walls and foundations. Elena was dismantling our foundation to pour a new one somewhere else. When I got home, Elena was already there. She was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables. The mail was on the counter, opened. The bank envelope was in the recycling bin. She turned to me, smiling, a glass of wine in her hand. Hi, honey. I decided to make that risotto you like. She was celebrating. She had seen the confirmation. She knew the money had cleared. In her mind, the heist was successful. She was cooking my favorite meal while standing on the trap door she had cut beneath my feet. Sounds great, I said, walking over to the recycling bin. I pretended to toss a receipt in, glancing down. The Heritage Trust envelope was ripped in half, buried under a diet soda can. Did we get anything interesting? I asked, nodding at the mail pile. She didn't even blink. She didn't hesitate. Just junk and a bill for the water. Oh, and a coupon for that pizza place. She looked me dead in the eyes, the woman I had promised to love in sickness and in health, and erased $150,000 of debt with a shrug. Good, I said, walking past her to the fridge. I hate clutter. I grabbed a beer, turning my back to her so she couldn't see the vein pulsing in my temple. I had the routing number, I had the notary's name, and now, thanks to her silence, I had the moral absolute. She had just fired the starting gun. She thought she was running a sprint to freedom, but she didn't realize she was running a marathon against a man who knew how to hunt. By the way, she said, her voice casual, too casual. I have a late showing tomorrow. Probably won't be home until 10. Don't wait up. No problem. I took a long sip of the cold beer. I have some work to catch up on anyway. Tomorrow night. That was it. She wasn't going to a showing. She was going to spend the money, or meet the man she was spending it with. And I was going to be right behind her. The following morning, the house felt less like a home and more like a movie set where the crew had gone home, leaving only the props behind. Elena had left early again. Another breakfast meeting with a developer that I knew didn't exist. She had kissed me goodbye with its same terrifyingly casual affection, the kind that made me question my own sanity. Was I the crazy one? Was I reading into things? Then my phone rang at 10 a.m. sharp, and reality snapped back into focus. It was Jim. "I found it," Jim said. No pleasantries. Jim knew that when a client called him with a problem like mine, time was measured in dollars lost. "Where is it?" I asked, closing the door to my home office. I had told my firm I was taking a few personal days. I couldn't focus on blueprints for a client's beach house when the blueprints of my own life were being redrawn without my consent. "It's a classic layering scheme, but she rushed it," Jim explained, his voice crackling slightly over the line. "The $150,000 didn't sit in that business account for long. The account ending in 8892 belongs to an LLC registered in Delaware. Apex Horizons LLC. Apex Horizons," I repeated, writing the name down on a legal pad. The name sounded vague, corporate, meaningless. "What do they do?" "Nothing," Jim said flatly. "It's a shell. No website, no physical office, just a registered agent address in Wilmington. But here is where she got sloppy. She transferred the funds out of Apex Horizons yesterday. $145,000 of it went to a corporate lease account for a property in downtown Stamford. The remaining $5,000 went to a personal checking account." "Who owns the checking account?" "I can't see the owner's name without a subpoena," Jim said. "But I can see the bank. It's a local credit union, and I can tell you who the registered agent for Apex Horizons is. It took some digging through the state filings, but I found the original articles of organization." I held my breath. "Who?" "Marcus Vane." The name hit me like a physical shove. Marcus Vane, the notary. "Are you sure?" I asked, my grip tightening on the pen. "Positive. Marcus Vane is listed as the organizer and the registered agent. David, your wife didn't just find a crooked notary to stamp a fake loan. She's in business with him. Or worse." "Okay," I said, my voice sounding hollow to my own ears. "Thanks, Jim. Send me everything." I hung up. The silence in the room was deafening. So it wasn't just a random notary she had bribed. Marcus Vane was the partner. He had stamped the document to release the funds, and then the funds had gone directly into a company he controlled. It was theft, plain and simple. Embezzlement. But I needed to see it. Digital files were one thing. They felt abstract, like numbers in a cloud. I needed to touch the betrayal. I needed to see the physical mark of their crime. I grabbed my car keys and drove to the town clerk's office. The Westport Town Hall was a beautiful brick building, the kind of place that projected stability and order. I had been here dozens of times to pull permits for my architectural projects. I knew the clerks. I knew the smell of the old paper and the lemon floor wax. Today, walking up those steps felt like walking into a police station to turn myself in. I went to the Land Records Division. The clerk, a woman named Mrs. Higgins who had known me for years, smiled when she saw me. "David, good to see you. Pulling the plat maps for the Henderson renovation?" I forced a smile. It felt brittle, like it might crack and fall off my face. "Not today, Mrs. Higgins. I actually need to check the recent filings on my own property. Just doing some estate planning and need to verify the recording of a lien." "Oh, sure thing." She typed into her computer. "Bennett, 44 Oak Ridge Drive? That's the one. Here it is," she chirped. "Recorded just 2 days. Ego. HELOC, Heritage Trust Bank. You want a certified copy or just to view the book?" "I'd like to see the book, please." She led me to the back of the room, to the rows of massive leather-bound volumes where the history of every property in the town was stored. While most things were digital now, there was still a lag, and the physical intake pile was sitting on a sorting table. "Actually, since it was just 2 days ago, it hasn't been bound yet," she said, sorting through a stack of papers. "Here we go. Original instrument." She handed me the document. There it was. 3 pages of standard legal boilerplate, staples crisp and sharp. I flipped to the signature page. Seeing it on a computer screen was painful. Seeing it in person was visceral. The blue ink of the signature, my signature, shimmered slightly under the fluorescent lights. It was a ballpoint pen. Someone, probably Marcus Vane or Elena, had held that pen and carefully deliberately traced my name. They had practiced. They had probably laughed about it, or maybe they had been nervous. But they had done it. I ran my finger over the indentation of the paper. The pressure was heavy, aggressive. Then my eyes moved to the notary block. State of Connecticut, County of Fairfield. On this 14th day of October, before me, Marcus Vane, the undersigned officer, personally appeared David Bennett and Elena Bennett. The stamp was pressed firmly in the corner. Marcus Vane, Notary Public. My commission expires Aug 2028. And next to the stamp, a signature. Marcus Vane. It was the same handwriting. I looked closely at the loop of the V in Vane and the D in David. The slant was identical. The pressure points were identical. Elena hadn't forged my signature. Marcus Vane had. She had brought him this document, and he had signed my name and then notarized his own forgery. It was arrogant. It was sloppy. It was the work of two people who thought they were smarter than the system. "Is everything all right, David?" Mrs. Higgins asked, noticing my stillness. I looked up. "Yes, just checking the dates. Mrs. Higgins, do you happen to know a notary named Marcus Vane? Does he come in here often?" She frowned, thinking. "Vane? No, I don't think so. Most of the local notaries we know. He must be independent, maybe from out of town." "Why?" Just, he did a good job," I said, the irony tasting like bile in my mouth. "Very efficient." I handed the document back. "Thank you. That's all I needed." I walked out of the town hall and into the bright autumn sunlight. The world looked exactly the same as it had when I entered, but my place in it had vanished. I wasn't David Bennett, successful architect and husband. I was a victim, a mark. I sat in my car and pulled out my phone. I typed Marcus Vane, Connecticut into the search bar. LinkedIn profiles, Facebook pages, Instagram. I found him. Marcus Vane, property developer, Chuck, investor, charter, entrepreneur. The profile picture showed a man in his late 30s, handsome in a slick, salesman kind of way. Perfect teeth, expensive suit, standing on the deck of a boat. He looked like the kind of guy who leased a BMW he couldn't afford. I scrolled down his employment history. University of Connecticut, class of 2008. My heart stopped. Elena was UConn class of 2008. I switched to Facebook. His profile was semi-private, but I could see his profile picture history. I scrolled back. 2015, 2012, 2009. And there, in an album titled Glory Days Senior Year, I saw it, a group photo at a tailgate party. Marcus Vane, holding a red Solo cup, his arm draped possessively around a girl with long, dark hair. She was laughing, her head thrown back, looking young and carefree. It was Elena. They weren't just business partners. They weren't just strangers who met for a transaction. They were history. I stared at the photo, zooming in on her face. It was the same face that slept next to me every night. But in this photo, she looked at Marcus Vane with a kind of adoration I hadn't seen directed at me in years. The timeline clicked into place. The late nights, the new clients. She hadn't just met someone new. She had reconnected with the past. She was rewriting our history to make room for him, and she was using my money, my credit, my house, to build the life they had probably promised each other 20 years ago. Jim had said $145,000 went to a corporate lease in Stamford. I pulled up the address Jim had sent. 400 Atlantic Street, Stamford, CT. I put the car in gear. I wasn't going home. I was going to see what they were building. The drive to Stamford took 20 minutes. 400 Atlantic Street was a high-end commercial building. Retail on the bottom, offices on top. I parked across the street and watched. The ground floor space was under construction. The windows were papered over, but the door was propped open for the workers. I grabbed a hard hat from my trunk. I always kept one for site visits, and a clipboard. I put on my safety vest. If you look like you belong, no one questions you. I walked across the street and right through the front door. The space was gutted. Drywall was going up. It was going to be a boutique or a salon, something high-end. "Help you?" a foreman asked, looking up from a blueprint. "Just checking the HVAC rough-in," I said confidently, not breaking stride. "Fire marshal wants to ensure the drops are compliant. Yeah, they're in the back, he grunted, losing interest. I walked to the back. On a makeshift table made of plywood and sawhorses, there was a stack of design renderings, colorful prints showing what the finished space would look like. It was an interior design studio and high-end furniture showroom. And the logo on the rendering? Elena and Vane Interiors. I stared at the rendering. It was beautiful, stylish, modern. It was exactly the kind of business Elena had always talked about wanting to start years ago, before she settled into real estate. Elena and Vane. She wasn't just leaving me, she was erasing me. She was taking my money to build a monument to her affair, a brick-and-mortar testament to her infidelity. She was funding her dream life with her lover, using the equity of the life she was currently living with me. I took a photo of the rendering with my phone, silencing the shutter sound. I walked out of the construction site, my legs feeling like lead. I had the paper trail, I had the motive, I had the proof. Now I knew exactly what I was dealing with. This wasn't a mistake, this was an execution. And if I didn't strike first, I was going to be left with nothing but the dust. I got back in my car and removed the hard hat. My reflection in the rear-view mirror looked older, harder. The David Bennett who had woken up yesterday morning was gone. The man staring back at me was ready for war. I drove home, arriving just as the sun was setting. Elena's car was in the driveway. I walked inside. She was in the living room, flipping through a magazine. She looked up, her face a mask of domestic tranquility. "Hey, you're home late," she said. "Traffic," I said. "How was your day?" "Oh, boring," she lied, effortless and smooth. "Just paperwork. Dull, endless paperwork." I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the girl in the photo with Marcus Vane. I saw the woman whose name was on the rendering in Stamford. "Paperwork is important," I said, walking past her to the stairs. "You have to make sure you sign in all the right places." Her smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second. A tiny crack in the porcelain. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice sharpening. I stopped on the bottom step and turned back. "Nothing. Just dealing with some contractors today. You know how they are. Always trying to cut corners." I went upstairs to shower. I needed to wash the construction dust off my skin, and then I needed to call the cruelest lawyer in Connecticut. Knowledge is power, they say, but in the 48 hours after discovering the existence of Elena and Vane Interiors, knowledge felt more like a slow-acting poison. I knew the what: fraud, embezzlement, infidelity. I knew the where: a gutted storefront in Stamford. But I still needed to understand the who: Marcus Vane. I spent the next morning not at my firm, but in the quiet, sterile office of a private investigator named Lyle. I had been referred to him by Jim, my accountant. Lyle wasn't the trench coat-wearing detective of bad fiction. He was a data analyst with a server farm in his basement and a subscription to databases that normal civilians didn't even know existed. "You said he's a notary?" Lyle asked, typing on a keyboard that sounded like hail hitting a tin roof. "He stamped the loan documents," I said, sipping stale coffee from a styrofoam cup. "But he's also listed as the registered agent for the shell company my wife wired the money to." Lyle hummed. "Let's see who Mr. Vane really is." The screen flickered, scrolling through lines of data. Public records, credit headers, court filings. As the picture of Marcus Vane resolved, my stomach turned. Marcus Vane wasn't a successful developer. He was a financial parasite. "Guy is drowning," Lyle narrated, pointing a pen at the screen. 3 failed LLCs in the last 5 years. A bankruptcy filing in 2019 that was dismissed, then refiled in 2021. He has judgments against him from 2 contractors and a lien on a condo in New Haven that's underwater. His credit score is practically sub-zero. I stared at the numbers. "So he has no money." "He has negative money," Lyle corrected. "He's looking for a lifeline. And it looks like your wife is it." The narrative shifted in my head. I had assumed they were partners, equals running away, together. But this was uglier. Elena wasn't just having an affair. She was being harvested. Vane was using her to clear his debts and start over, and she was using my credit to pay the tab. She was burning down our house to keep him warm. "Can you track him?" I asked. I can ping his phone location if you want to pay the premium, Lyle said. But honestly, you don't need me for that. Look at this. He pulled up Vane's social media usage map. He checks in at a gym in Fairfield every day at 11 a.m. Routine is the enemy of secrecy. I paid Lyle and left. It was 10:45 a.m. I drove to the gym in Fairfield, a high-end club with valet parking and a juice bar. I parked my sedan in the lot of the grocery store across the street, lowered the visor, and waited. At 11:15 a.m., a black Range Rover pulled in. I recognized the car instantly. It was Elena's. But Elena wasn't driving. Marcus Vane stepped out of the driver's seat. He looked exactly like his photos, perhaps. A bit more weathered, but he carried himself with an arrogant swagger. He was wearing workout gear that looked brand new. He tossed the keys to the valet like he owned the place. He was driving my wife's car, the car I paid the insurance on, the car I had washed in the driveway 2 weeks ago. I watched him jog up the steps, and then I saw the passenger door open. Elena stepped out. She was wearing a tennis outfit, her hair pulled back in a high ponytail. She looked vibrant, youthful. She laughed at something he said, a full-bodied, genuine laugh that I hadn't heard in years. She ran up the steps to catch him, slipping her arm through his. He leaned down and kissed her, not a peck, but a deep, lingering kiss right there in the entrance of the gym. I gripped the steering wheel so hard the leather creaked. It wasn't the sex that gutted me. I could intellectualize sex as a biological impulse. It was the intimacy. It was the way their bodies moved in sync, the way she looked up at him with total blind adoration. She looked at this bankrupt, lying fraudster like he was the king of the world, while I, the man who had provided the safety, the home, the stability, was just an obstacle to be liquidated. They disappeared inside. I sat there for an hour torturing myself with scenarios. Were they planning their future on the treadmill? Were they laughing about how easy it was to fool me while they sipped kale smoothies? When they came out, the dynamic shifted. They walked back to the car, but they didn't get in immediately. They stood by the door, talking. Vane looked agitated. He was gesturing with his hands, looking intense. Elena was nodding, reaching out to touch his arm, soothing him. She opened her purse and pulled out an envelope. She handed it to him. He took it, checked the contents quickly, and slid it into his gym bag. Then his demeanor changed instantly. The charm turned back on. He hugged her, lifting her slightly off the ground. She was paying him an allowance. My wife, who complained if I bought the expensive brand of paper towels, was handing cash envelopes to a man who had failed at everything he touched. I waited until they drove off. Elena driving this time, Vane in the passenger seat, and I followed them. I kept 2 cars between us, careful not to be seen. They didn't go to the construction site. They went to a small, secluded park near the water. They sat on a bench looking out at the Long Island Sound. From my vantage point, I could see Vane talking, pointing at the horizon, probably spinning tales of the great life they were going to have once the business took off. I took out my phone and snapped a few photos with the telephoto lens. Evidence, proof of association. But as I watched them, a profound realization settled over me. This wasn't just about the money anymore. If Elena had just stolen $150,000, I might have been able to process it as a mental breakdown or a gambling problem. If she had just cheated, we could have had the screaming fight and the divorce. But this was a holistic replacement. She had forged my signature because, in her mind, I was already gone. I was a ghost haunting her house. She had transferred her loyalty, her finances, and her future to Marcus Vane long before she transferred the cash. I was simply the resource they were strip mining before they moved on. I looked at Vane through the lens. He was handsome, sure, but I saw the weakness in his jaw, the desperate look in his eyes when the mask slipped. He was a drowning man clinging to Elena, and she was too love-struck to see she was the raft he would eventually sink. I lowered the phone. I had enough. I wasn't going to confront them in the park. That was what a jealous husband did. I wasn't just a husband anymore. I was a creditor, and I was going to call in the debt. I drove back to my office, the silence of the car feeling heavy. I had a meeting with my lawyer scheduled for the next day, but I needed to set the stage tonight. I needed to see if she still had a conscience, or if it had been completely cauterized by her ambition. That evening, I got home before her. I cooked dinner. I set the table. I put a bottle of wine on the counter, a bottle of expensive red that we had been saving for a special occasion. When she walked in at 7 p.m., she looked tired again. The vibrancy from the gym was gone, replaced by the hard-working realtor persona she wore for me. "Oh, wow," she said, seeing the table. "What's the occasion?" "No occasion," I said, pouring the wine. The liquid was dark, like blood. "Just realized we haven't really talked in a while. With work being so crazy." She stiffened slightly. "That's sweet, David. I'm just exhausted. Can we keep it simple?" "Of course." I handed her the glass. "I had a weird day, actually." She took a sip, her eyes over the rim of the glass watching me. "Oh? Why?" "I got a call from an old college buddy, Mike. Remember him?" I improvised. "Vaguely." "Yeah, he's going through a nasty divorce. Apparently his wife took out credit cards in his name, racked up 50 grand in debt to fund a boyfriend." Elena froze. The glass stopped halfway to her mouth. It was a micro-reaction, a stillness that lasted less than a second, but I saw it. "That's terrible," she said, her voice tight. "I know," I continued, cutting into my steak with surgical precision. "I told him he should prosecute. It's fraud, right? It's not just a divorce issue. It's a criminal one. Prison time. Imagine ruining your life for 50 grand. I looked up at her. "What do you think? Should he send her to jail?" Elena set the glass down. Her hand was trembling, just barely. The wine rippled in the glass. "I think marriage is complicated," she said, her voice low. Maybe she felt trapped. Maybe she didn't see another way out. "There's always a way out that doesn't involve forgery," I said, my tone hardening. "Trapped is a feeling. Fraud is a fact." She looked away, unable to meet my eyes. She picked up her fork, pushed a potato around her plate, and then put the fork down. "I'm not feeling very hungry, actually," she whispered. "I think I'm going to go take a bath." "Okay," I said cheerfully. "I'll clean up." I watched her walk up the stairs. She looked smaller than she had this morning. The weight of the secret was pressing down on her. She was scared. Good. She knew that I knew something was wrong, even if she didn't think I knew the specifics. She was walking on a tightrope, and I had just shaken the wire. I cleared the table, dumping the expensive dinner into the trash. Tomorrow I would see the lawyer, and we would stop talking about friends and start talking about felony charges. Marcus Vane wanted a lifeline. I was about to hand him an anchor. If there is a specific circle of hell reserved for the betrayed, it is hosting a dinner party with the person who betrayed you. The event had been on our calendar for a month. It was a seasonal gathering, a pretentious term for 6 couples drinking too much wine and complaining about property taxes. In any other year, I would have enjoyed it. I like cooking. I like the performance of hospitality. But this year, as I watched Elena arranging hydrangeas in a crystal vase on the dining table, I felt like I was preparing the stage for a tragedy. "Do you think the beef Wellington needs 5 more minutes?" Elena asked, glancing at the oven. She was wearing a midnight blue dress that I had bought her for her birthday. It hugged her frame perfectly. She looked stunning. She looked expensive. "It needs 10, I said, my voice calm. "You don't want the pastry to be soggy." "You're right. You're always right about the meat." She smiled at me, a dazzling, public-facing smile. It was the smile she used on brochures. I looked at her and wondered if she was thinking about Marcus Vane. Did she cook for him? Did she buy him takeout with the money she had siphoned from our home equity? The juxtaposition of her domestic perfection here and her criminal negligence in reality was dizzying. The doorbell rang at 7 p.m. sharp. The first to arrive were the Hendersons, Bob and Clara. Bob was a commercial real estate attorney, loud and jovial. Clara was a silent partner in his life, mostly nodding and sipping Chardonnay. "David, house looks incredible as always," Bob boomed, shaking my hand. "I swear you architects have all the secrets. Lighting is perfect." "It's all about the dimmers, Bob," I said, taking his coat. By 7:30, the house was full. 12 people. The air was thick with the smell of roasting meat, expensive perfume, and the low hum of conversation. Elena was in her element. She moved through the room like a diplomat, refilling glasses, laughing at jokes. She had heard a dozen times, touching my arm affectionately whenever she passed by. To everyone in this room, we were the golden couple, the architect and the realtor, the foundation and the sales pitch. I played my part. I poured the wine, a vintage Cabernet that cost more than Marcus Vane's suit. I laughed. I discussed the new zoning laws with a council member, but inside I was a coil of razor wire. Every time Elena touched me, I had to suppress a flinch. Every time she laughed, I heard the echo of her voice in the gym parking lot with Vane. We sat down for dinner at 8:15. The conversation flowed predictably. Local politics, the school board, the fluctuating market. "So, Elena," said Greg, a hedge fund manager seated to my left, "how's the market treating you? I hear inventory is tighter than a drum." Elena beamed. "It is, but it's exciting. You have to be creative to get deals done these days. You have to really fight for your clients." "She's a shark," Abhishocha interjected, slicing my beef. The table quieted slightly to listen. "Elena has a gift for finding value where no one else sees it, and for moving assets around." Elena's eyes flickered to mine, just a microsecond of hesitation. "Well, you have to be agile," she said smoothly. "Speaking of agile, David, Bob was telling me about a fascinating case he's working on." She tried to pivot. I didn't let her. "Actually, Bob," I said, turning to the attorney, "I had a question for you. Something that came up in a project recently." Bob wiped his mouth with a linen napkin. "Shoot." "I was reading about title fraud. It's becoming an epidemic, isn't it? People forging deeds, taking out loans against properties they don't own, or worse, spouses doing it to each other." The air in the room seemed to drop 5 degrees. It was a heavy topic for a dinner party, but Bob loved legal horror stories. "Oh, it's rampant," Bob said, leaning in, "especially with digital closings now. But the old school forgery? That still happens. We had a case last year where a guy notarized his own wife's signature to buy a boat. Thought he was clever." I took a slow sip of wine, my eyes locked on Elena. She was staring at her plate, her knuckles white as she gripped the stem of her glass. "What happened to him?" I asked. "Prison," Bob said cheerfully. "Fraud over a certain amount is a felony. And the banks? They don't play nice. They have whole departments dedicated to hunting these people down. The forensic trail is impossible to erase. Digital footprints, IP addresses, notary logs, it's all there." "Notary log," I repeated, tasting the words. "That's the weak link, isn't it? If the notary is corrupt." "Exactly," Bob nodded. "But that's the thing about corrupt notaries. They usually have a history, they're desperate, and when the pressure is applied, they flip on their accomplices instantly to save their own skins." I saw Elena's throat move as she swallowed. She reached for her water glass, her hand trembling just enough to make the ice cubes clink against the crystal. Clink, clink, the sound of fear. "Well, that's terrifying," Clara chirped, trying to lighten the mood. "Let's hope none of us have secret boat funds." The table laughed, a polite, nervous laughter. Elena laughed too, but it was a hollow, brittle sound. It arrived a second too late and ended a second too soon. "It's not just boats," I said, keeping the spotlight on the topic. "Sometimes it's a second life, a condo in Miami, a business venture. People think they can build a new reality on top of a lie, but the foundation is rotten." I looked directly at Elena. "Right, honey? Structural integrity is everything." She looked up. Her face was pale, her blush standing out like bruises on her cheeks. Her eyes were wide, pleading. She knew. In that moment, she knew that I wasn't talking about a hypothetical client. She didn't know how much I knew, but she knew the water was rising. "Absolutely," she whispered. "Integrity is everything." "Anyone for dessert?" She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "I made a tart." She fled to the kitchen. The conversation resumed, but the energy had shifted. I excused myself and followed her. She was standing at the kitchen island, gripping the edge of the granite counter. Her breathing was shallow. She hadn't started plating the dessert. She was just staring at the wall. I walked in, letting the swinging door close behind me. The sounds of the party became a muffled murmur. "You okay?" I asked, leaning against the refrigerator. She jumped, spinning around. "You startled me." You seemed a little flushed out there, I said. Bob's stories can be intense. It's just warm in here. The oven, she stammered. She reached for the serving knife, her hand shaking so badly she couldn't pick it up. She dropped it. It clattered onto the counter. Let me help, I said. I stepped forward, invading her personal space. I picked up the knife. I began to slice the tart, my movements precise and steady. You know, I said softly, not looking at her, I always wondered why people take those risks. The stress of it must be unbearable. Looking over your shoulder every day, wondering if today is the day the email arrives, or the phone rings, or the sheriff knocks on the door. I placed a slice of tart on a plate. I looked at her. She was pressed back against the counter, looking at me like I was a stranger. David, she started, her voice trembling. Yes? I've been under a lot of stress lately. Work, the market. I know, I said soothingly, but you have me. We're a team, right? We don't keep secrets. We don't sign things without telling each other. I handed her the plate. Eat, I said. You need the energy. She took the plate. She looked like she was going to be sick. We went back out to the guests. Elena performed. She smiled. She served. She laughed. But the light had gone out of her eyes. She was functioning on autopilot, a machine running on fumes. When the last guest finally left at 11 p.m., the silence that descended on the house was heavy, suffocating. Elena kicked off her heels and immediately started loading the dishwasher. She was manic, needing to do something with her hands. That went well, she said, her back to me. It did, I agreed. I loosened my tie. Bob is a sharp guy. I might give him a call next week. I have some personal legal matters I might need advice on. She froze, holding a dirty plate. What kind of matters? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Oh, just estate planning, I said. Updating the will, checking the deeds, making sure everything is exactly where it's supposed to be. I walked over to her, kissed her on the cheek. Her skin was cold. Good night, Elena. I went upstairs, leaving her standing in the kitchen with the wreckage of the dinner party. I knew she wouldn't sleep tonight. I knew she would be texting Marcus Vane, panic-stricken, telling him that I was acting strange, that I was asking questions. Good. Let them panic. Let them make mistakes. Tomorrow the psychological torture would end and the legal trap would snap shut. I had an appointment with the toughest divorce attorney in Westport at 9 a.m. I had given her a chance to confess tonight. I had practically begged her to break down and tell me the truth. But she hadn't. She had doubled down on the lie. She had looked me in the eye and toasted to integrity while standing on a floor of fraud. The time for hints was over. It was time for the notary's pen. The offices of Sterling, Holt, and Vance were located on the top floor of a glass monolith in downtown Stamford, overlooking the very city where Elena and her lover were building their stolen future. I had chosen this firm for a specific reason. They didn't advertise. They didn't have billboards on the highway promising quick, easy divorces. They were the kind of firm you only called when you wanted to destroy someone so completely that even their shadow would leave them. I sat in a conference room that smelled of lemon polish and old money. The table was a slab of mahogany long enough to land a plane on. Sitting opposite me was Silas Thorne. Thorne was a man in his 60s who looked like he had been carved out of granite and dressed in Italian wool. He didn't offer me coffee. He didn't offer sympathy. He simply opened the file I had sent him, the forensic accounting report, the photos of Marcus Vane, the rendering of the design studio, and the copy of the forged HELOC. He read in silence for 10 minutes. The only sound was the turning of pages and the hum of the HVAC system. Finally, he closed the folder and took off his reading glasses. You have a very industrious wife. Mr. Bennett, Thorne said, his voice dry and gravelly. It takes a certain amount of hubris to forge a spouse's signature on a federally regulated loan document. Most people stick to credit cards. I want to know where I stand, I said, leaning forward. I want her out of the house. I want my equity back. And I want to ensure she doesn't get a dime of my firm or my retirement. Thorne leaned back, steepling his fingers. The emotional response is to change the locks and throw her clothes on the lawn. But the legal response requires more finesse. Connecticut is an equitable distribution state. That means the court divides assets fairly, not necessarily equally. Usually that means 50-50. Even with fraud, I asked, incredulous. Fraud helps, Thorne conceded. We can argue dissipation of assets. We can prove she stole marital funds to support a paramour. That will help us recover the $150,000. But if you file for divorce today, she will lawyer up. She will claim you verbally authorized the loan and just forgot. She will claim the business venture was a joint discussion. It becomes a he said, she said war of attrition. She might still get 40% of the house, simply because she's been your wife for 10 years. He paused, looking me dead in the eye. Do you want a settlement, David? Or do you want a slaughter? I want a slaughter, I said without hesitation. Thorne permitted himself a small, terrifying smile. Then we need leverage. We need to move this from a civil dispute into the realm of undeniable criminal intent. We need to catch her in the act of covering it up. She already forged the signature, I argued. Yes, but she did that in the dark, Thorne countered. She did that with a corrupt notary in a back room. If we confront her with it now, she'll spin a story. We need her to lie on the record. We need her to double down when given a clear exit ramp. He pulled a legal pad toward him and uncapped a fountain pen. Here's the strategy. We don't accuse her of the HELOC yet. Instead, you go home and tell her you found a fantastic opportunity to refinance the primary mortgage on the house. Lower interest rate, lower monthly payments. It's a financial no-brainer. I frowned, trying to follow his logic. Refinance? How does that help? Think about the mechanics of a refinance, David. To refinance a home, the new lender runs a title search. They look for all existing liens. That $150,000 HELOC is a lien on your property. It will show up immediately. The realization dawned on me. So she'll know she's caught. Exactly. But she won't know you know. She will think the title search is just a routine bureaucratic hurdle. She will be in a panic. She will have two choices. Confess to you before the title search reveals it, or try to fix it, I finished. Precisely. And since she has already demonstrated a willingness to commit felonies, my bet is she will try to hide it. She might try to forge a satisfaction of mortgage document. She might try to bribe the title officer. Or most likely she will attend the closing with you and try to bluff her way through it, signing affidavits stating there are no other undisclosed liens. Thorne leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. If she signs a refinancing affidavit stating there are no other liens, when she knows there is a $150,000 HELOC, she commits mortgage fraud. Again. But this time she does it in front of a neutral, legitimate notary and a title attorney that I will select. We will have her on tape, on paper, and under oath. So I have to play dumb, I said. I have to pretend I'm trying to save us money. You have to be the loving, financially responsible husband, Thorne agreed. You force her into a corner where the only way out is the truth, and then you watch her choose the lie. Once she signs those papers at the new closing, we don't just have a divorce case. We have a leverage hammer so heavy she will sign over her rights to the house, the dog, and the silverware just to keep you from calling the district attorney. I sat back, absorbing the cruelty and the brilliance of the plan. It was a trap, a stress test for her morality. If she had any shred of decency left, she would stop me. She would say, David, we can't refinance. I did something terrible. If she confessed, maybe, just maybe, there was a humanity worth salvaging. But if she let me walk into that office, if she tried to sign another lie to cover the first one, then she deserved everything that was coming. Who do we use for the title company? I asked. I have a contact, Thorne said. Standard title and escrow. The closing attorney is a stickler. He checks every dot and tittle. I'll let him know to expect a complex closing. He won't know the details, but he'll be thorough. Thorne stood up, signaling the meeting was over. Go home, David. Be the architect. Draw the blueprints for the refinance. Make it sound like the smartest financial move you've ever made, and then watch her squirm. I left the law firm with a sense of cold purpose. The anger that had been burning me up inside had cooled into something hard and sharp. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was the operator. The drive home felt different. The autumn leaves looked crisper. The world had clarity. When I pulled into the driveway, Elena's car was there. She was home early. Probably recovering from the stress of the dinner party. I walked inside. She was in the living room, curled up on the sofa with a cup of tea, staring blankly at the television. She jumped when I entered. "Hey," she said, her voice tight. "You're home early." "Good news," I said, putting a bounce in my step that I didn't feel. "I had a great meeting with a financial planner today." Her eyes widened slightly. "A financial planner? I thought you were at the site." "I was, but I made a detour. I've been crunching the numbers, Elena. With the current market rates, we are overpaying on our mortgage by almost 1.5 points. I sat down next to her on the sofa. I picked up her hand. It was cold and limp. "I'm going to refinance the house," I announced, beaming. "I already started the paperwork. We can save about $1,200 a month. We can put that money into savings, or maybe that vacation to Italy you've always wanted." I watched the blood drain from her face. It was fascinating in a morbid way to watch the physics of fear. Her pupils dilated. Her breath hitched. "Refinance?" she squeaked. "Now? Is that a good idea? The market is so volatile." "It's the perfect time," I insisted. "I locked in a rate this afternoon. The application is already in. The bank is going to run the title search tomorrow, and we should be able to close early next week." "Tomorrow?" She pulled her hand away, standing up. "David, that's so fast. Don't we need to discuss this?" "What's to discuss?" I stood up too, closing the distance. "It's free money, Elena. Unless, is there a reason we shouldn't?" I let the question hang in the air. "Is there a reason?" She looked at me, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape hatch. She was doing the mental math. She knew the title search would find the HELOC. She knew she had less than 24 hours to figure out how to hide a $150,000 elephant. "No," she stammered. "No reason. Just, it seems like a lot of paperwork. And with work being so busy—" "Don't worry about the paperwork," I said, placing my hands on her shoulders. "I'm handling everything. All you have to do is show up at the closing and sign. It'll be easy." I squeezed her shoulders gently. "It's for our future, honey. We need to maximize our assets, right?" She looked up at me, and I saw the terror behind the mask. She was trapped. If she said no, she had to explain why. If she said yes, she was walking toward a cliff. "Right," she whispered, her voice breaking. "For our future." "Great," I said, releasing her. "I'm going to go change. I feel like celebrating. Let's order sushi." I walked up the stairs, leaving her standing in the living room. As I reached the landing, I glanced back. She was already on her phone, typing furiously. She was calling Marcus. She was telling him the walls were closing in. I went into the bedroom and closed the door. I walked over to the window and looked out at the front yard. The trap was set. Thorne was right. The anticipation was better than the confrontation. I took out my phone and sent a text to Thorne. "Green light. She took the bait. Schedule the closing." I stripped off my suit, feeling lighter than I had in days. The game was entering its final act. She had chosen to betray me. Now she would have to choose between confessing to her husband or committing perjury in front of the law. And knowing Elena, and knowing the desperation of Marcus Vane, I knew exactly which path they would choose. They would try to outsmart the system one last time, and I would be there to watch the notary's pen destroy them. The 3 days leading up to the closing were a masterclass in psychological warfare. I had expected Elena to break. I had expected her to come to me, tears streaming down her face, and confess everything. I had prepared myself for the sobbing apology, the excuses about Marcus Vane manipulating her, the plea for forgiveness. In the back of my mind, a small, foolish part of me even hoped for it. If she confessed, it would mean she still respected me enough to tell the truth when cornered. But she didn't confess. She strategized. The morning after I announced the refinance, the house was filled with a frantic, buzzing energy. Elena was up before me, which never happened. I found her in the kitchen surrounded by papers, her laptop, open, phone pressed to her ear. She hung up abruptly when I walked in. "Good morning," I said, pouring coffee. "Who was that?" "Just the office," she said, closing her laptop a little too quickly. "Dealing with a difficult closing. Speaking of closings, David, about this refinance." Here it comes, I thought. The stall. "I was looking at the calendar," she continued, her voice pitched slightly higher than normal. Next week is impossible for me. I have 3 inspections and the charity gala committee meeting. Can we push it to next month? The rates might drop even further. She was buying time. She probably thought that in 30 days, she could figure out a way to pay back the HELOC, or maybe get Marcus to secure a loan to cover it. She didn't realize that the money was already gone, sunk into the drywall and rent of a failing business idea in Stamford. She was trying to bail out the Titanic with a teaspoon. I wish we could, Arne, I said, leaning against the counter, playing the role of the pragmatic husband. But the rate lock I secured is a 48-hour special promotion. If we don't close by Tuesday, we lose the point reduction. It's a difference of about $20,000 over the life of the loan. We can't throw that away, can we? I looked at her, challenging her to say that $20,000 didn't matter. She bit her lip. No, of course not. Great, so Tuesday at 10 a.m. I've already cleared it with the title company. Standard title and escrow on Main Street. Standard title? She frowned. Why aren't we using the bank's notary or my usual title officer? I get a discount. The lender insisted, I lied smoothly. They have a preferred list. It's a compliance thing. Besides, a standard is reputable. Silas Thorne recommended them. The mention of the high-powered attorney didn't register with her. She didn't know I had retained him. But the rigidity of the plan made her shoulders slump. She was realizing the walls were made of concrete, not drywall. Okay, she whispered. Tuesday. For the next 48 hours, I watched her unravel. She stopped eating. She would pick at her dinner, moving the food around the plate like a disturbed landscape. She stopped sleeping. I would wake up at 2 a.m. and find her side of the bed empty. I would find her downstairs, sitting in the dark, staring at her phone. I knew she was talking to Marcus. I could only imagine the conversations. He's refinancing. The title search will find the loan. Fix it, Marcus. Do something. I can't. The money is spent. Then what do? I didn't have to imagine for long. On Monday afternoon, the day before the closing, I received a secure email from Silas Thorne. Subject, update on title search at David. The preliminary title report is back. As expected, the $150,000 HELOC from Heritage Trust is listed as a second lien position. The title officer at around Standard has flagged it. He will be asking for a payoff statement or a satisfaction of mortgage at the closing. Also, we found something interesting. An inquiry was made to the county clerk's office this morning regarding the lien release process. The caller claimed to be from Heritage Trust, but the number traces back to a burner cell phone. I stared at the screen. They were getting desperate. Marcus, or Elena, was trying to figure out how to forge a release document. They were researching how to fake a bank letter saying the loan was paid off. They were going to try to bluff the title officer. I typed a reply to Thorne. Let the title officer know to expect a fraudulent document. Do not reject it beforehand. Let her present it at the table. I want her to hand over a forged federal document in front of witnesses. Understood, Thorne replied. The trap is primed. That evening, the atmosphere in the house was funereal. I came home to find Elena packing a bag. My heart stopped for a second. Was she running? Was she cutting her losses and fleeing to Mexico with Marcus? Going somewhere? I asked from the doorway. She jumped, dropping a silk blouse. Oh no, yes, just for a night. I have to go to Boston for a seminar early tomorrow morning. Boston? I checked my watch. But the closing is tomorrow at 10 a.m. I know. She looked frantic, her eyes wide and wet. I completely forgot about this seminar. It's mandatory for my license renewal. If I don't go, I lose my accreditation. It was a clumsy lie. Realtor license renewals didn't work that way, and she knew that I knew it. But panic makes people stupid. She was trying to physically remove herself from the equation. If she wasn't at the closing, the refinancing couldn't happen. The title search would still happen, but she wouldn't be there to answer for it. That's a problem, I said, walking into the room and sitting on the bed. Because the lender requires both of us to be there to sign. It's joint property. I can sign a power of attorney, she said quickly. I'll sign a form giving you the right to sign for me. I can do it right now. It was a brilliant Hail Mary. If she gave me power of attorney, I would sign all the documents. When the HELOC came up, I would be the one confused. I would be the one dealing with it. She could claim ignorance later. I didn't know about that loan. David must have done it. She was trying to set me up to take the fall for her fraud. I shook my head slowly. The lender won't accept a power of attorney for a cash-out refinance. Federal regulations. We both have to be there, in person, with ID. I stood up and put my hands on her shoulders. She was trembling. Elena, skipping this isn't an option. If we don't close tomorrow, the rate expires, and the application fee I paid is forfeited. It's thousands of dollars. You can drive to Boston after the closing. It will only take an hour. I can't, she stammered. The seminar starts at 8 p.m. Then you'll be late, I said, my voice dropping an octave. I hardened my gaze. Is there something you're not telling me? You seem terrified of this meeting. She froze. The direct question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. She looked at me, searching my face for suspicion. She saw only concern and frustration. No, she whispered. No, of course not. I'm just stressed about the license. Good. Then unpack the bag. We leave at 9:30. She didn't unpack the bag, but she stopped packing. She sat on the edge of the bed and put her head in her hands. She looked small, defeated, and incredibly lonely. I almost felt pity. Almost. Then I remembered the Elena in vain logo. I remembered the text messages. I remembered the forgery. I went downstairs and double-checked the file I had prepared. My ID. The current mortgage statement. And in a separate, hidden pocket of my briefcase, the original forged HELOC document I had obtained from the bank. I poured myself a scotch and stood by the window, looking out at the dark street. She had one night left. One night to come downstairs and say, David, I'm in trouble. One night to be my wife again. But the night passed in silence. The next morning, Tuesday, dawned gray and rainy. A perfect, pathetic fallacy for the end of a marriage. Elena came downstairs dressed in a sharp black suit. She had put on more makeup than usual, likely to cover the dark circles under her eyes. She looked like she was going to a funeral. Ready? I asked. Ready, she said. Her voice was robotic. We got into the car. The drive to Standard Title and Escrow was only 15 minutes, but it felt like hours. Neither of us spoke. The rain lashed against the windshield. As we pulled into the parking lot, I saw a car I recognized. A gray Mercedes. Silas Thorne's car. He wasn't supposed to be in the room, but he was. In the building, watching from the wings. I parked the car and turned off the engine. Elena, I said. She flinched, her hand on the door handle. Yes? Last chance, I said. Is there anything we need to discuss before we go in there? Anything about the house? The finances? She looked at the building, then at me. Her eyes were terrified, but her jaw was set. She had made her choice. She was going to bluff. She was going to walk into that room and lie to a federal officer. No, she said, forcing a smile that looked like a grimace. Let's get this over with. Okay, I said. After you. I watched her walk toward the glass doors of the title company. She held her head high, clutching her purse tightly. Inside that purse, I suspected, was a forged document from Marcus Vane intended to explain away the HELOC. She was walking into a bear trap, and she thought she was wearing steel-toed boots. I grabbed my briefcase and followed her. The receptionist smiled as we entered. Mr. and Mrs. Bennett, they're ready for you in conference room B. We walked down the hallway. The carpet was plush. The lighting was soft. It was a place where dreams were signed into reality. Today, it was an execution chamber. I opened the door. Sitting at the head of the table was the closing attorney, a stern-looking man named Mr. Henderson. Next to him was the notary, a woman with reading glasses and a no-nonsense demeanor, and on the table a stack of documents 3 inches thick. Please have a seat, Mr. Henderson said. We sat, Elena on my left. Before we begin the signing for the new loan, Mr. Henderson said, adjusting his glasses, we need to clear up a few items on the title report. Just standard procedure. I felt Elena stiffen beside me. Of course, I said comfortably. What items? Mr. Henderson flipped open a folder. We have the primary mortgage with Chase, which will be paid off, but there is a second lien, an home equity line of credit with Heritage Trust for $150,000, recorded on October 14th. He looked up over his glasses, his gaze landing directly on Elena. I don't have a payoff statement for this loan in the file. Mrs. Bennett, Since your name is on the filing, do you have the account details? The room went silent. The air conditioner hummed. I turned to Elena, putting on my best confused face. A second lien? $150,000? That must be a mistake. We don't have a HELOC. All eyes turned to Elena. The trap had snapped shut. The silence in conference room B was heavy enough to crush a diamond. The title attorney, Mr. Henderson, was looking at Elena over the rim of his spectacles. His expression wasn't accusatory, merely expectant. He was a bureaucrat of the highest order, a man who believed that for every number on a ledger, there must be a corresponding piece of paper. Mrs. Bennett, he repeated, the home equity line of credit with Heritage Trust. Do you have the payoff information? Elena cleared her throat. The sound was brittle, like dry leaves stepping on pavement. She reached into her purse. The purse I knew contained the desperate countermeasure she and Marcus had concocted. Oh, that, she said, her voice trembling with forced nonchalance. That must be a clerical error. We did open a line of credit last month for potential renovations, but we decided against it. We never drew on the funds. It should be closed. She pulled out a single sheet of paper and slid it across the mahogany table. In fact, she added, gaining a sliver of confidence, I have a letter here from the bank confirming the account has a zero balance and is in the process of being discharged. Mr. Henderson picked up the paper. He held it up to the light. He adjusted his glasses. I sat perfectly still. I knew what the letter was. It was a forgery. A good one. Probably created with a high-resolution scanner and a stolen logo. But a forgery. Nonetheless, Heritage Trust hadn't issued that letter because Heritage Trust was currently missing $150,000. I see, Henderson said slowly. A zero balance letter. That's helpful. He placed the letter down, but he didn't smile. He turned to the notary, Ms. Gable. However, Henderson continued, his voice dropping to a lower, more serious register, a zero balance letter isn't a recorded satisfaction of mortgage. The lien is still active on the county title. We cannot close on the new loan until the old lien is legally released. And frankly, this letter, he paused, tapping a finger on the Heritage Trust logo. This letter lacks a tracking number, and the signature of the bank officer looks digital. Elena's face drained of color. I can call them. I have a contact there. That won't be necessary, I interrupted. My voice was calm, the voice of a confused husband trying to help. Mr. Henderson, if the account is open, surely we can just authorize you to pay it off from the new loan proceeds? We just need to know the account number. No, Elena snapped too quickly. We don't need to pay it off. It's zero. Why would we pay off a zero balance? Because, I said, turning to her, Mr. Henderson says there is a lien. That means there is a debt. Elena, did we borrow $150,000 or not? You handle the finances. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. She was trapped between the lie she told me, that it didn't exist, and the lie she was telling the attorney, that it was paid off. We didn't use the money, David, she lied, looking me dead in the eye. It's a mistake. Mr. Henderson sighed. He opened the thick file again. Well, let's look at the source document. I pulled a copy of the recorded deed of trust from the county clerk this morning to verify the filing. He pulled out a photocopy of the fraudulent HELOC, the same document I had found in the bank records days ago. He placed it in the center of the table. Here is the loan agreement, Henderson said, dated October 14th, notarized by Marcus Vane, and signed by both of you. I leaned forward, putting on my reading glasses. I stared at the document as if seeing it for the first time. October 14th, I asked. I was in Boston on October 14th. You must be mistaken, Mr. Bennett, Henderson said. Your signature is right here. I reached out and touched the paper. May I? Henderson nodded. I pulled the document closer. I looked at the signature. The blue loop of the D, the lazy cross of the T. It was the forgery Marcus Vane had executed. This is interesting, I said softly. I reached into my inner jacket pocket and pulled out my driver's license. I placed it on the table next to the document. Then I took the pen from the notary's hand. I pulled a blank piece of scratch paper from the center of the table. Ms. Gable, I said to the notary, you are an expert in the signature verification, correct? Ms. Gable, a severe woman with gray hair, nodded. I am. Watch me sign my name, I said. I signed my name on the scratch paper. David Bennett. I did it with my usual flair, and I made sure to include the tiny, almost microscopic dot inside the loop of the B, the architect's mark I had used for 20 years. Now, I said, pointing to the HELOC document, look at that signature. Ms. Gable leaned in. She adjusted her glasses. She looked at my wet ink signature. She looked at my driver's license. Then she looked at the HELOC. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the hard drive in Henderson's computer. Mr. Henderson, Ms. Gable said, her voice flat and professional. We have a problem. What is it? Henderson asked. The signature on the recorded instrument is inconsistent with the exemplar provided by Mr. Bennett, she stated. The pressure points are wrong, the slant is too vertical, and, she pointed with a manicured nail, Mr. Bennett includes a diacritical mark in his capital B. The signature on the deed lacks it. She looked up, her face stern. This signature is a forgery. I sat back in my chair and looked at Elena. She wasn't looking at the papers. She was looking at the door. She looked like an animal caught in the headlights, waiting for the impact. David, she whispered, don't do this here. Do what? I asked, my voice rising just enough to be heard clearly. I didn't sign this, Elena. Who signed this? It's just a formality, she hissed, trying to keep her voice down. It's the same account. Just sign the new papers and we can fix it later. Fix it later? Mr. Henderson slammed the folder shut. The sound was like a gunshot in the small room. Mrs. Bennett, are you suggesting we proceed with a closing based on a fraudulent title? I'm saying it doesn't matter, she cried, her composure cracking. It's our house. It's our money. Who cares who signed what piece of paper? The law cares, Mrs. Bennett, Henderson said coldly. And the bank cares. And I care. He turned to me. Mr. Bennett, if you are stating for the record that you did not sign this HELOC, then we are looking at a case of identity theft and mortgage fraud. I cannot close this new loan. In fact, I have a legal obligation to report this discrepancy to the title underwriter immediately. Report it? Elena stood up, knocking her chair back. No, you can't report it. It's a misunderstanding. David, tell him. Tell him you signed it. She grabbed my arm. Her nails dug into my suit jacket. Her eyes were wild. Tell him you forgot, she begged. Please, just tell him. I looked down at her hand on my arm, the hand that wore my wedding ring, the hand that had text messaged her lover while lying in bed next to me. I gently but firmly peeled her fingers off my sleeve. I can't do that, Elena, I said, because I didn't forget. I was never there. I turned to Mr. Henderson. I want to file an affidavit of forgery right now. I want it on the record that this lien is fraudulent. David, Elena screamed. It wasn't a word. It was a sound of pure terror. And, I continued, ignoring her, I think we should talk about the notary who witnessed this. Marcus Vane. At the sound of his name, the fight went out of her. She slumped back against the wall, covering her mouth with her hand. She realized then that this wasn't just a bad meeting. This wasn't just a financial hiccup. She realized I knew. I knew the name. I knew the game. I knew everything. Marcus Vane, Henderson repeated, writing the name down, will look into his commission status. If he notarized a signature for a person who wasn't present, that's a felony. Henderson looked at Elena, his eyes full of professional disgust. Mrs. Bennett, I think it would be best if you left my office. I need to speak with your husband regarding the necessary legal filings to clear his title. But, she stammered. Now, Henderson barked. Elena looked at me one last time. She looked for the husband who had always fixed everything, the man who had supported her, the soft landing she had taken for granted. She found only an architect who had just condemned a building. I'll see you at home, I said coldly. Start packing. She grabbed her purse and fled the room. We heard her heels clicking frantically down the hallway, then the heavy thud of the front door. I sat there in the silence, the adrenaline slowly ebbing away, leaving a cold, hard clarity in its wake. Miss Gable, the notary, looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and respect. I'm sorry, Mr. Bennett, she said softly. Don't be, I replied, picking up the forged document and staring at the name of the man who thought he could steal my life. You just saved me from a terrible investment. I looked at Henderson. What's the next step? Henderson picked up the phone. We call the fraud department at Heritage Trust. And then I suggest you call the police. Do it, I said. The notary's pen had done its work. The lie was exposed. Now the demolition could begin. The drive from the title company to our house took 15 minutes. But the distance between the man I had been that morning and the man driving the car now felt like light years. I had spent an extra hour with Henderson and the notary, filing the initial affidavits of forgery. I had watched them photocopy my license, take formal statements, and initiate the call to the fraud department of Heritage Trust. The legal machinery was now grinding forward, stripping away the layers of Elena's deceit with indifferent mechanical precision. When I pulled into the driveway, the rain had stopped, leaving the suburban street glistening in gray. Elena's Audi was parked crookedly in the driveway, as if she had abandoned it mid-turn. I walked to the front door, the silence of the neighborhood pressing against my ears. I unlocked the door and stepped into the foyer. The house was quiet. Too quiet. "Elena?" I called out. I found her in the living room. She was pacing. She had taken off her blazer and was still wearing the silk blouse she had worn to the closing, but now it was untucked, looking disheveled. She had a glass of wine in her hand at 11:30 in the morning. When she saw me, she stopped pacing. Her eyes were red, swollen from crying, but as she looked at me, the expression shifted. The fear hardened into something sharp and defensive. This was the pivot I had been waiting for. The gaslighting. "How could you?" she hissed, her voice shaking with rage. I stopped in the doorway, loosening my tie. "How could I what?" "Humiliate me like that." She gestured wildly with the wine glass, splashing a drop of red onto the white carpet. "In front of those people, you treated me like a criminal, David. You dragged me into that office and set me up. You knew about the loan, and you sat there playing dumb just to embarrass me." It was breathtaking audacity. She was trying to make me the villain of her felony. "I treated you like a criminal," I said calmly, walking over to the sidebar to pour myself a glass of water. "Because you committed a crime. And I didn't set you up, Elena. I gave you an opportunity to tell the truth. I asked you 3 times if there was anything we needed to discuss. You chose to lie." "It wasn't a lie," she screamed. "It was a management strategy. I was handling it. I was going to pay it back before you even noticed. It was an investment, David. For us." She stormed over to me, her eyes pleading now, switching tactics from anger to victimhood in the span of a breath. "You've been so distant lately," she said, her voice trembling. "So focused on work. I wanted to surprise you. I wanted to build something for our future, to show you I could contribute, more than just commissions. I took the loan to start a business venture, a passive income stream. It was going to be a surprise for our anniversary." She reached out to touch my chest. "I forged the signature because I didn't want to burden you with the paperwork. You know how you get about details. I was trying to protect you from the stress." I looked down at her hand. It was the same manipulation she had used for a decade. Poor Elena, just trying to help. David is too rigid, too controlling. "Protect me," I repeated flatly. "You forged my name on a federal loan document to protect me." "Yes," she cried. "It was a mistake, I admit it. I shouldn't have signed it. But David, calling the police, filing affidavits? That's insane. We're husband and wife. We don't solve problems with lawyers. We solve them at home. Call Mr. Henderson. Tell him it was a misunderstanding. Tell him you authorized it verbally." She looked at me with wide, wet eyes. "Please, baby, don't ruin my life over a signature." I stepped back, letting her hand fall from my chest. The time for listening was over. It was time for the autopsy. "It's not just a signature, Elena," I said, "and it's not just a loan." I walked over to my briefcase, which I had set by the door. I clicked the latches open. Snap, snap. Sounded like gunshots in the quiet room. I pulled out the manila folder I had been building for 2 weeks. "You said this was for us," I said, pulling out the first document. "You said it was an investment." I tossed the paper onto the coffee table. It slid across the polished wood. "Apex Horizons LLC," I said. "Registered in Delaware. The shell company where you wired the $145,000. Elena froze. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. I pulled out the next document. And the registered agent for Apex Horizons? Marcus Vane. At the sound of his name, she flinched physically, as if I had slapped her. The color drained from her face completely, leaving her looking like a wax figure. I don't know what you're talking about, she whispered, but the conviction was gone. Don't insult my intelligence, I said, my voice rising just a fraction. I know who he is, Elena. I know he's your ex-boyfriend from Yukon. I know he's a bankrupt con artist with 3 failed businesses and a mountain of debt. And I know he's the notary who forged my signature. I tossed the photos Lyle, the investigator, had taken. The photos of them at the gym, the photos of them on the park bench, her handing him the envelope of cash. She stared at the photos. The evidence of her double life was scattered across the coffee table like a chaotic mosaic. David, wait, she stammered, backing away. It's not what it looks like. Marcus is a business consultant. He was helping me set up the LLC. The money is for a project. It's strictly professional. Professional? I laughed, a harsh, mirthless sound. Is that what you call it when you kiss him in the parking lot of the Equinox? Is that what you call it when you funnel our home equity into his pockets to pay off his gambling debts? We didn't. She started to sob. It's not an affair. We have a connection. He understands my vision. His vision is a theft, I cut her off. But let's talk about your vision. I pulled out the final piece of evidence, the one that hurt the most, the one that made it permanent. I held up the photo I had taken inside the construction site in Stamford, the rendering of the showroom, Elena and Vane interiors. Elena and Vane, I read aloud. Not Bennett. Vane. I stepped closer to her, holding the photo up so she couldn't look away. You weren't just stealing money, Elena. You were building a lifeboat. You were setting up a new life, a new business, and a new identity with another man. You were going to leave me. You were just waiting until the business took off, until you had drained enough equity from this house to fund your startup costs. She collapsed onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands. The gaslighting attempts were gone. The denials were gone. The weight of the truth had finally crushed the lies. I was unhappy, she wailed, her voice muffled by her hands. I felt stifled. You're always so perfect, David, so controlled. Everything has to be your way. Marcus makes me feel alive. He takes risks. He takes my money, I corrected. He takes risks with my credit. That's not being alive, Elena. That's being a parasite. I looked down at her. 10 years of marriage, 10 years of vacations, dinners, laughter, and silence. All of it dissolved into this moment, a weeping woman on a sofa and a table full of damning paper. I spoke to the forensic accountant this morning, I said, my voice cold and final. We traced the funds. We know about the lease in Stamford. We know about the payments to the contractors. The police are going to be very interested in how a notary public is also the primary beneficiary of a fraudulent loan he notarized. That's racketeering, Elena. That's conspiracy. She looked up, her face streaked with mascara. Police? David, please, you can't. They'll put him in jail. They'll put me in jail. You should have thought about that before you practiced my signature, I said. I checked my watch. I'm going to a hotel. I've already packed a bag. The locks on the house will be changed tomorrow. My attorney will be in touch regarding the divorce filing and the restraining order to freeze our assets. You're leaving me? She whispered as if the idea was inconceivable. No, Elena, I said, picking up my briefcase. You left me on October 14th. I'm just finally walking out the door. I turned and walked toward the hallway. David, she screamed after me. You can't do this. I love you. I stopped. I didn't turn around. No, I said softly to the empty air. You love the lifestyle I provided, and you love the thrill of betraying it. I walked out the front door and closed it behind me. The click of the latch was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. I got into my car and drove away. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't look back at the window where I knew she was watching. The collapse was total. The foundation had failed, and for the first time in months, I could breathe. The structure was gone, but the ground beneath my feet was finally solid. The days following the collapse of a marriage are not measured in hours, but in legal billable increments and police report numbers. I spent the first 3 nights at the Delamar Hotel in Southport. It was a beautiful place staring out at the harbor, but I barely saw the water. My world had shrunk to the size of a laptop screen and a stack of legal documents. I was no longer a husband. I was the chief witness in a grand larceny investigation. The morning after I walked out, Detective Miller from the Westport Police Department called me. "Mr. Bennett, we need you to come down to the station. We've picked up Mr. Vane." The satisfaction I expected to feel was absent. Instead, I just felt a heavy, dull exhaustion. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. The police station was a sterile environment of fluorescent lights and linoleum. Detective Miller, a man with tired eyes and a coffee stain on his tie, met me in a small interview room. "Here's the situation," Miller said, opening a file. "We executed a search warrant on the business address in Stamford this morning. It's exactly as you described. Half-finished construction, no permits, and a paper trail that looks like a child's drawing of a money laundering scheme." "And Vane?" I asked. "We picked him up at his condo in New Haven. He was packing a bag." Miller smirked humorlessly. "Usually these white-collar types are arrogant. Until the handcuffs go on. Then they start singing. Mr. Vane didn't even wait for his lawyer to arrive before he started talking." My stomach tightened. "What did he say?" "He says it was all your wife's idea," Miller said flatly. "He claims he was just a consultant. He says she approached him, she forged the documents, and she pressured him to notarize them because she was desperate to leave you. He's trying to paint himself as a victim of a manipulative woman." I laughed. It was a dark, bitter sound. "Of course he is. Rats always eat each other when the ship sinks." "We don't buy it entirely," Miller assured me. "The money trail leads to his accounts. But here's the hard part, David. Because of the amount, $150,000, and the use of a fraudulent public seal, this is a Class B felony. The bank is pressing charges. They have to for their insurance." He paused, looking at me with a strange mix of pity and professional detachment. "We have an arrest warrant for Elena Bennett." Hearing it out loud was different than thinking it. My wife, the woman I had shared a bed with for 10 years, the woman whose laugh I used to love. There was a warrant for her arrest. "Do you know where she is?" Miller asked. "At the house, I assume," I said. "She has nowhere else to go. We're going over there now to execute the warrant and ensure she vacates the premises, as per the emergency protective order your lawyer filed. Do you want to be there?" "No," I said initially. Then I thought about the house. My house. The one I designed. I thought about the damage she might do in a fit of rage. "Actually," I corrected myself, "yes, I need to secure the property." We drove in separate cars. Seeing a police cruiser pull into my driveway was a surreal nightmare. The lights weren't flashing, but the presence was undeniable. The neighbors were watching. Mrs. Gable next door was peering through her blinds. The suburban facade of perfection was being dismantled in public view. Detective Miller knocked on the door. There was no answer. He knocked again, louder. "Mrs. Bennett, this is the Westport Police." Still nothing. Miller looked at me. I handed him my key. He unlocked the door and pushed it open. "Elena?" We found her in the kitchen. She was sitting at the island, wearing a bathrobe, staring at a half-empty mug of coffee. She looked like she had aged 10 years in 48 hours. Her hair was matted, her face gaunt. She didn't look up when the officers entered. She only looked up when she saw me standing in the hallway behind them. "You brought them," she whispered. Her voice was cracked, devoid of the fire she had shown yesterday. "You brought them, Elena," I said quietly, "on October 14th. "Mrs. Bennett," Miller said, stepping forward, "I have a warrant for your arrest for forgery in the first degree, larceny in the first degree, and conspiracy. Please stand up and place your hands behind your back." She stood up slowly, moving like a sleepwalker. When the cuffs clicked onto her wrists, she flinched, a small, sharp intake of breath. It was the only sound she made. "David," she said, her back to me as Miller began to recite her Miranda rights. "David, please, call my dad. Don't let him find out on the news." It was the first selfless thing she had said in weeks. Or maybe it was just shame. "I'll call him," I said. I watched them lead her out. I watched my wife, handcuffed, being guided into the back of a police cruiser in the driveway of the home we had built together. As the car drove away, taking her to a holding cell, I felt a profound sense of loss. Not for her, the woman in the car was a stranger, but for the time, the decade of life that now felt like a long, intricate lie. The house was silent. I walked through the rooms. She had packed a few boxes, but mostly her things were still there. Her clothes in the closet, her toothbrush in the bathroom. It was a ghost town of a marriage. I went to the kitchen and poured the cold coffee down the sink. Then I sat at the island and took out my phone. Calling Frank, Elena's father, was the hardest thing I had ever done. Frank was a good man, a retired school principal who adored his daughter. He thought we were the perfect couple. He answered on the second ring. "David, to what do I owe the pleasure? Everything okay with the refinance?" I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. "Frank, you need to sit down. I have some terrible news." I told him everything. I didn't sugarcoat it, but I didn't add malice. I told him about the loan, the forgery, Marcus Vane, and the arrest. There was a long silence on the other end, a silence so deep I thought the line had gone dead. Then I heard a sound that broke my heart, the sound of an old man weeping. "I'm so sorry, David," he choked out. "I'm so sorry. We raised her better. I don't know who she is anymore." "I know, Frank," I said softly. "Neither do I." "I'll come down," he said, his voice hardening with parental duty. "I'll bail her out. She's still my daughter. But David, I want you to know, I don't blame you. You did what you had to do." "Thank you, Frank." I hung up. The next few days were a blur of logistics. My lawyer, Silas Thorne, was ruthless and efficient. He filed the divorce papers, citing fault due to financial fraud and adultery. He obtained a court order granting me exclusive possession of the marital residence. He communicated with the bank, providing the police reports and affidavits to clear the lien from the title. Because I had caught it early, and because the money was frozen in Vane's accounts by the police, the bank would recover most of the funds. My credit would survive. My house would be safe. But the emotional cost was incalculable. I went to the construction site in Stamford one last time. The Elena and Vane sign had been torn down, likely by the landlord who had also been stiffed on the rent. The windows were papered over. The dream of their new life was just a dusty, abandoned storefront. I learned later through the grapevine that Marcus Vane had taken a plea deal almost immediately. He testified that Elena was the mastermind, that she had stolen the notary stamp from his bag without his knowledge. A lie, but one that muddied the waters enough to save him from maximum prison time. Elena, abandoned by her lover and facing the full weight of the evidence I had gathered, had no leverage. She was looking at probation, restitution, and a felony record that would strip her of her real estate license forever. She had gambled everything on a fantasy, and she had lost everything in reality. I spent my nights in the empty house, painting over the walls. I changed the color of the bedroom from the pale blue she loved to a warm, neutral gray. I packed her things into boxes and had movers take them to her parents' house. I purged the house of her presence, room by room, drawer by drawer. It was surgical. It was necessary. One evening, about a week after the arrest, I found the card she had given me for our last anniversary. It was in the back of a drawer. "To my rock, I don't know where I would be without you." I looked at the handwriting, the same loops, the same slant as the signature she had forged on the loan. I took the card to the fireplace. I lit a match and held it to the corner of the paper. I watched the flame curl the edges, turning the sentiment into ash. "You're right," I said to the empty room as the fire consumed the last of the paper. "You don't know where you'd be without me, but now you're going to find out." I dropped the ash into the grate. The storm was over. The wreckage was cleared. Now, all that was left was to see what could be built on the empty lot. 6 months after the arrest, the ink finally dried on. The divorce decree. It arrived in the mail on a Tuesday, fittingly enough. The same day of the week, the original credit alert had pinged my phone and started the demolition of my life. I sat in my office in Westport, holding the heavy envelope from the court. Bennett versus Bennett. Final judgment of dissolution. There was no fanfare, no balloons, Just a quiet, bureaucratic administrative thud that signaled the end of a decade. I opened it. The terms were exactly what Silas Thorne had promised. Because of the criminal conviction, Elena had pleaded guilty to second-degree larceny to avoid jail time. The equitable distribution was heavily weighted in my favor. I kept the house. I kept my retirement. She received a small nominal settlement that was immediately garnered to pay restitution to the bank and her own legal fees. She had walked away with nothing but her clothes and a felony record. I placed the document in my filing cabinet, filed under P for past, then turned back to my drafting table. I was designing a lake house for a client in the Berkshires. It was a complex build, cantilevered decks, floor-to-ceiling glass, a structure that needed to look weightless while being anchored into solid rock. For a long time after the separation, I couldn't draw. My lines were shaky. My vision was clouded by anger. But lately, the lines were straight again. I put down my pencil and looked out the window. It was spring. The dogwoods were blooming along the street, white and pink explosions of life against the gray asphalt. I decided to go for a walk. I needed to breathe the air of a free man. Town was busy. I walked past the coffee shop where Elena and I used to meet on weekends. I walked past the boutique where she bought her scarves. It was strange how the geography of a town holds the ghosts of a relationship, but the ghosts were fading. They were becoming transparent, losing their power to hurt. As I turned the corner onto Main Street, I saw her. It was inevitable, really. Westport isn't that big. I had braced myself for this moment for months, wondering what I would feel. Rage, pity, longing. She was coming out of a discount clothing store, carrying a plastic bag. She looked different. The expensive highlights were gone, replaced by her natural, darker brown hair tied back in a messy bun. She wasn't wearing the tailored suits of a high-end realtor anymore. She was wearing jeans and a nondescript beige sweater. She had lost her real estate license, of course. The ethics board doesn't look kindly on mortgage fraud. I had heard from Frank, her father, that she was working as an administrative assistant at a logistics company in Norwalk, a quiet, paper-pushing job where she handled no money and signed no deeds. She saw me at the same moment. She froze on the sidewalk. The crowd flowed around us, oblivious to the history standing 5 feet apart. "David," she said. Her voice was softer, stripped of the confidence she used to wield like a weapon. "Elena," I replied. I was surprised by how steady my voice was. My heart didn't hammer. My hands didn't shake. I just felt a mild, distant curiosity. She shifted her weight, gripping the plastic bag tighter. I heard the papers came through today." "They did." "That's good," she said, looking down at her sneakers. "I'm glad it's over. I didn't want to fight you on the settlement. I hope you know that." "You didn't have much of a choice, Elena," I said, not unkindly. It was just a fact. She looked up, and I saw the lines of fatigue around her eyes. The stress of the criminal proceedings, the probation, the public humiliation. It had taken a toll. She looked smaller. "How is the house?" she asked, a flash of wistfulness crossing her face. "Different," I said. "I renovated the kitchen. New counters, new paint." She flinched slightly. The kitchen was where she had hidden the papers. Where she had lied to me. Where I had watched her call Marcus. "Right," she whispered. "Erasure." "Renovation," I corrected. "You can't build on a cracked foundation. You have to pour a new one." She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I know I ruined everything, David. I know you probably hate me. But Marcus, he manipulated me. He told me it was the only way we could be free. He promised he would pay it back before the first statement arrived." "Marcus Vane is a predator," I said. "But you opened the door for him. He didn't forge my signature, Elena. You handed him the pen." She didn't argue. She knew it was true. Vane had turned on her instantly during the investigation, painting her as the mastermind to cut a deal for himself. He was currently serving 6 months in a minimum security facility, but his reputation was destroyed. They were both shipwrecked, drowning in the separate lifeboats they had tried to build out of my hull. "I miss you," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Not the money, not the house. I miss having someone who actually saw me. I looked at her, really looked at her, one last time. "I did see you, Elena. I said gently. That was the problem. I saw the woman I loved. I didn't see the woman who was capable of stealing my name. And now, I don't see either of them. I checked my watch. I have to go. Good luck, Elena. I stepped around her. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The cord was cut. I walked back to my car, feeling lighter with every step. The encounter hadn't reopened the wound. It had cauterized it. She was just a person I used to know, a cautionary tale about the corrosive nature of greed. I drove home. My home. The house looked beautiful in the afternoon light. I had removed the heavy drapes she loved, letting the sun flood the living room. I had replaced the ornate furniture with cleaner, mid-century modern pieces. The space felt open, honest. I walked into the kitchen, the new kitchen, with its clean white quartz and simple lines. On the counter sat a bottle of wine and a set of blueprints. I poured a glass of wine and unrolled the plans for the lake house. I picked up my pen. I looked at the signature block in the corner of the blueprint. Designed by David Bennett, AIA. I signed my name. The ink flowed smoothly. The D was sharp. The T's were crossed. And there, inside the loop of the B, I placed my dot. It was a small thing, a tiny speck of ink. But it meant everything. It meant authenticity. It meant that I verified this work. It meant that I stood behind it. My signature was no longer a weapon used against me. It was my seal of approval on a life I was building on my own terms. I took a sip of wine and looked out at the backyard. The grass was green. The sky was blue. The world was quiet. Forgery is a clever trick. It can mimic reality for a while. It can fool the banks, the lawyers, and even the spouses. But eventually the ink fades, the paper crumbles, and the truth remains. I wasn't just a survivor of fraud. I was the architect of my own reconstruction. And this time, I was checking every angle, measuring every beam, and ensuring that nothing, absolutely nothing, was hidden in the walls. I went back to work. There were new foundations to pour,